Hello everyone, and welcome back to Game Review. My name is Caleb Denby, and today I'm going to be taking you through a game between Mikhail Botvinnik and Mikhail Tal. Totally mispronounced their first names, but what are you going to do? It's tough. I don't speak Russian. E4, C6, D4, D5 is how this game began. Of course, entering the Caro-Kann. In the game, White chose the advanced variation with E5. And this is one of the most testing variations of the Caro-Kann, actually. This one puts a lot of pressure on Black, and as we'll see in this game, it's one fitting of Tal's style. It involves some crazy pawn pushes, some crazy attacking styles with White kind of foregoing all sense of positional play, going straight for the throat with an attack on the king side. In the game, Black chose bishop f5. This is the main line of the advanced variation. These days, sometimes Black goes for this early c5 move, but bishop f5, the old main line, still totally playable today. White plays this move h4, and these days I like this move h5 from Black here. It keeps an eye on this g4 square, but in this game, Botvinnik played h6. This is kind of an older way of playing. And now, Tal expands right away with g4. Black brings this bishop back actually to d7. Rather than stepping back along this file, losing control of the e6 square, bishop d7 keeps things a little bit more solid. White now expands further with h5, and Black goes ahead and challenges the center immediately with c5. And this is kind of the feeling you should get if you're playing the Caro in this type of position here. When White starts going crazy on the king side with all of these pawn pushes, the best thing for you to do, as normal, is to counter in the center. It's the old saying, you want to counter an attack on the flank, an attack on the wing, with an attack in the center. You want to challenge the center of the board. And that's what Botvinnik does here. We see c3, supporting this d4 pawn. Black follows up with knight c6. This bishop comes out to h3. Once again, trying to eye this e6 square, very dangerous. And so Black plays e6 himself, not allowing White to break through with this dangerous move. White continues development with not knight e2, but instead bishop e3. And now Black plays this annoying move, queen b6. And queen b6 is probably the reason this bishop e3 move isn't so good. It creates some very annoying threats to this b2 pawn. And if White isn't careful, Black is simply going to take this pawn. You can play something like knight e2, but now queen takes b2 will come through, and this is going to be a comfortable extra pawn for Black here. White isn't really in time to break through with moves like rook b1. So in the game, White defended the pawn with queen b3, but now the problem is for White, with the queens coming off the board, he's created a lot of weaknesses, both on the king side and in the center, and that's what really made the difference in this game. We saw c takes d4, queen takes b6, a takes b6, c takes d4, and now knight a5. Already, Black is threatening to bring this knight to the annoying c4 square. White simply develops with knight c3, and now we see b5 from Black, pushing this pawn up the board, making its presence known. Bishop f1 was White's choice, threatening to take this pawn, and after b4, White actually brings this knight all the way up to the b5 square. And at first glance, you might start panicking if you're the Black player here, because knight c7 is a pretty serious threat, and you need to do something about it. But with the queens off the board, and with the center so closed, king d8 is actually a perfectly fine response for Black here. It keeps an eye on the c7 square, it steps out a knight d6 check, and it gives Black a perfectly fine position, and the king is going to be relatively safe on this d8 square. Knight f3 is White's choice, but now after knight c4, this knight's a little bit lonely out on the b5 square. Its little defender here, totally cut off by this knight on c4. After bishop takes c4, we see d takes c4. The knight has the same problem. It must step to the d6 square, where it can be captured. And now this pawn is not long for this world. It's a bit too difficult to keep developed. Black chose this bishop c6 move, creating an annoying pin on this diagonal. White tried to break out of it tactically in classic Tal style with knight e5, but simply bishop takes h1 is enough for Black. White does take this f7 pawn and take this h8 rook. After knight check, black played king e8 rather than king g7. We see knight takes h8. But now bishop e4 is a very nice move by black. Keeps this knight under pressure on this h8 square. Not so easy to break free just yet. White chose this interesting move d5, trying to get this bishop to some better squares. But black can simply capture this pawn. Bishop d4 doesn't really come with the devastating effect that Tal was probably hoping for. Black simply develops and cuts off this bishop from the attack on the g7 pawn. King d2 is white's choice, giving the rook the ability to move to more squares on this first rank. But now king d7 by Botvinnik, and he's easily collecting this d pawn. After knight e5, we see king takes d6. And in this endgame, let's do a quick count of the pawns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to 1, 2, 3, 3, 4, 5. Black is simply up a pawn here. And in addition to that, these pawns are pretty far advanced. They are definite key players in the position. They control a lot of squares and put a lot of pressure on white rather. White chose f3 to try and help his position. We see bishop h7, and now g5, another interesting try by Tal. He always comes up with these nice pawn sacrifices to give himself chances, but once again, Botvinnik simply captures it, and it's not enough here. h6 was Tal's idea, and after g takes h6, we see knight f7, regaining at least one of these pawns. But after knight takes h6, knight g8 is actually how Botvinnik chooses to evict this knight. Knight g4, bishop f5. This knight comes back to e3, but simply bishop g6. The players repeated once, and actually twice, but now after knight g4, Botvinnik, of course, isn't going for the repetition here. He's up 2 clean pawns in this position, simply king d6. Knight e5 was Tal's choice, but this game is pretty much over here. Tal regains this g5 pawn, but it's not enough. Simply knight e7, and after f4, knight c6, knight f3. In this position, white has regained one of the pawns, but black has solved all of his problems. Black has developed this knight back to the c6 square, where it controls the board. This bishop's well placed to blockade this pawn on f4, and this rook puts nice pressure on the a2 pawn. And the fact is, none of the white pieces can really move here. So after king d6, Tal threw in the towel and resigned this game. Play might have continued with something like bishop g7, but now simply even. King c5, and these pawns are going to roll down the board quite quickly. So a very nice game by Botvinnik, shows the power of the Caro-Kann, shows why white should not go up against the Caro-Kann unless he's ready to lose in a horrible, horrible endgame in a horrible fashion. Let this be a word of warning to you Caro-Kann players. Be careful, don't let black trade queens, because if you do, you're going to be in for a pretty painful loss. Thank you very much for joining me this week on Game Review. My name is Caleb Denby, and I will see you in the next episode.